Before we begin, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe that service to this country doesn't come with an expiration date, go ahead, like and subscribe. Because what happened to the man you're about to meet should never happen to anyone who has ever worn the uniform. His name was Robert Keene, Bobby, to those who knew him well. That quiet Tuesday morning, he didn't show up looking for attention. He wasn't there to start trouble, flash medals, or talk about old battles. All he wanted was to withdraw a few $100s from an account he hadn't touched in years. It was the same account where he'd once deposited hazard pay from deployments that the government still hesitates to fully acknowledge. He stepped through the doors of Summit Ridge National Bank like any other man would. Steady, calm, hat in hand. That hat, a black cap with gold stitching reading Korea Vietnam Veteran, had been carefully brushed before he left his home. His shirt was clean and pressed, though the cuffs had begun to fray. In his coat pocket, a worn VA card, two crumpled, discharge papers, and a brass challenge coin dulled at the edges by time. He waited in line quietly, the way men from his era always do, like patience is still a sacred thing. But when he reached the counter, everything changed. The teller, probably in her mid-20s, glanced at his name on the account, her expression puzzled. Bobby handed over his ID, hands trembling, not from fear or weakness, but from the cold grip of time and too many nights spent outdoors. "Just trying to pull some funds," he said gently. "It's under Robert Keene. Been a while." She offered a stiff smile, typed, then paused. Something didn't match. She flagged the manager. His name was Caden. Slick haircut, short tie, that condescending smirk you don't need words to feel insulted by. He looked over Bobby's paperwork, then Bobby himself, and let out a sarcastic chuckle. "You sure this account's yours, sir?" he said, drawing out "sir" like it was some kind of joke. "This discharge form looks like it was typed on a dinosaur." The teller chuckled awkwardly. Bobby said nothing. He reached into his coat and gently placed a brass coin on the counter, etched with a thunderbird and 7 stars. Any real soldier would have stopped breathing at the sight of it. But Caden didn't even look. "Cute trinket," he said. "You can buy those online." Then he turned to security. "I think we've got another wannabe vet trying to scam the system. Escort him out." The guard hesitated, just long enough for Bobby to hear the insult, and for the bank's customers to notice. A few chuckled, others pretended not to. Still, Bobby didn't protest. He picked up the coin, slipped it back into his coat, and walked to a bench by the window. He sat upright, hands folded, eyes distant, silent. The laughter faded. The room grew colder. Not with guilt, yet, but with a kind of discomfort. One person didn't laugh. Her name was Maya Rodriguez, early 30s, former Air Force logistics, now defense contractor. She'd seen a coin like that once before, when a retired JSOC colonel briefed her team. She remembered how everyone in that room had stood in respect the moment it hit the table. She walked to the counter, stared the manager down, and said, "You just made a mistake." Caden blinked. "Excuse me?" She pointed to the bench. "That man isn't a fake. That coin outranks every paycheck in this building." Caden scoffed. "If he's so important, why isn't someone here with him?" She didn't answer. She just stepped outside and made a call. But someone else was already moving. In a back office, an older employee, quiet, no title, but the kind who knows everything, had overheard the name Robert Keene. He paused, then walked over to a brass plaque on the wall. It had been there since the bank opened. Dedicated to Summit Ridge Command Base and the men who built it. One name hadn't faded. R.J. Keene, the man who oversaw military infrastructure before the land ever became a bank, so. Same man now being accused of faking his service, in the very building he once commanded. The employee picked up the phone, dialed a number only a few people still remembered. He spoke just 6 words. "It's Bishop Coyne, Summit Ridge. He's here." Outside, Bobby waited, silent, still. He didn't scroll through his phone. He didn't ask for anything. He just watched the flag across the street move with the wind. Because men like him wait. They wait even when no one believes them. They wait when the world laughs. What no one in that bank knew, not Caden, not the teller, not even Maya, was that in less than 30 minutes the laughter would turn to silence. Because a furious general had already hung up his phone, thrown on his dress uniform, and was on his way. Major General Everett Caney didn't need a long explanation. When he heard the name Robert Keene, he stopped mid-briefing and said 4 words to his aide. "Suit up. We're leaving." Keene wasn't just a name to him. He was a legend, a ghost, a mentor, the man who trained the doctrine Caney followed, the fact that he had been insulted, dismissed, disrespected. In uniform on ground, he once commanded, "Lit." A fire in the general few had ever seen. Back at the bank, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter was gone. Unease filled the room. Even the customers who'd smirked were avoiding eye contact now. Caden still tried to act unbothered. "He's still here," he muttered. "Seriously? Probably hoping someone posts about it for a pity donation. Veterans pull that crap all the time." Maya's jaw clenched. Even the teller looked down ashamed. Caden leaned back with smug satisfaction. "I should have called the cops." And then the doors burst open, not with a breeze but with command. Boots hit tile, slow, measured, intentional. In walked Major General Everett Caney, full dress, every ribbon in place. His presence filled the lobby before he even said a word. Behind him, his aide followed, briefcase in hand. No one moved. Phones dropped. Coffee stopped pouring. Caden looked up, then froze. Kane's eyes didn't scan the room. They locked straight onto the bench, onto Bobby Keene, and that's where everything truly began to change. The general snapped to attention and saluted. The sound of his palm cracking against his temple echoed louder than any apology ever could. Bobby looked up, confused for just a moment, then slowly rose to return the salute with the quiet dignity of a man who hadn't been saluted in years, but had never forgotten how. Kane turned slowly, scanning the room like a blade. His voice, low and sharp enough to cut glass, asked, "Who here called Colonel Robert Keene a fraud?" Every syllable landed like steel. No one answered. Kane stepped forward. "Colonel Keene," he said again, the rank crisp and undeniable, was instrumental in establishing joint force recon protocols still used in free nations. His record spans 2 wars, 6 theaters, and 14 unacknowledged operations. You questioned his identity. All eyes turned to Caden. The manager looked sick. I didn't know," he stammered. "His papers were old." "Of course. They're old," Kane snapped. "Because he's earned his age. He fought for this country while your biggest challenge was learning how to schedule tweets." The silence shifted from awkward to shameful. Kane's aide stepped forward, opening a briefcase. Inside was a thick, classified folder, a commemorative coin set in velvet, and a printed scan of the plaque on the bank wall, Robert Keene's name engraved in bold. Kane placed the folder on the counter. "This bank exists because of his strategic design. That account you flagged as suspicious? It funded the original supply lines you now profit from." Turning back to Bobby, his voice softened. "Sir, I'm sorry I didn't know you were in town sooner." Bobby gave a tired nod. "Didn't come to be found. Just needed enough to help my grandson with school." Kane nodded. "Then let's make that happen." Together they stepped toward the counter. Caden backed away, hands raised in silence. The laughter was long gone. The lesson had just begun. The silence in Summit Ridge National Bank was no longer awkward. It was reverent. Everyone in that room felt something shift, like the ground had suddenly remembered its own weight. General Everett Kane stood beside Colonel Robert Keene, not to give orders, not to demand punishment, but simply to stand as if nothing else in the world mattered until this man got what he came for. Bobby withdrew the funds quietly. No ceremony. Just the quiet act of helping his grandson pay for college, something he hadn't even mentioned until the general asked. He never wanted attention, never had. All he ever wanted was to keep his word, to those he fought for, and those he came home to. The teller's hands shook as she printed the receipt, whispering an apology Bobby didn't acknowledge. Not out of spite, just because he didn't need it. He folded the slip once and tucked it into his pocket like it was just another task done. As he turned to leave, Kane placed a hand on his shoulder. "Colonel, you've got 5 minutes," he said. Bobby raised a brow. "For what?" Kane nodded toward the room. "For the honor you never asked for." Without a single word of command, every veteran in the bank, from a young reservist near the ATM to an old Navy corpsman filling out a deposit slip, stood and saluted. Even the civilians rose from their seats, not because they were told to, but because something in the air said, "This is how you honor a man like that." Bobby froze, not in pride, but in disbelief, then returned the salute with quiet precision. Kane reached into his coat and handed him a small velvet box. "We've been holding this for years. Thought you'd want it now." Inside was a medal, clean and polished, engraved with a name and 3 words, "Service Beyond Record." Bobby stared at it for a long time. No tears, no speech. Just a slow nod, like a door had finally closed. One no one else had even known was open. "I didn't come here to be remembered," he said softly. "I came to keep a promise." Kane nodded. "And in doing so, you reminded us all what service really means." Bobby walked out into the sunlight. No cameras followed. No headlines came. But the people inside stood a little straighter, spoke a little softer. Later that week, a new line was added to the plaque by the bank's front entrance. Below the original, "Dedication," a second inscription appeared. "Robert J. Keene, Colonel, U.S. Army Honor and Silence." It didn't name the incident. It didn't mention the general. But everyone who worked there knew. Because some truths don't need to be shouted to change everything. And now, every time a customer walks through those doors, they see the name of the man they almost laughed out of the building.